My wife locked our son in his room to meet her lover at home. But I forgot to tell her about the hidden cameras I installed, while she kept pretending to be the perfect wife. My name is Robert. This is what happened when I decided to watch the video clips from the hidden cameras I installed without telling my wife. What I saw shattered everything I once believed about love and marriage. When I met Lana, she worked as a receptionist at a dental clinic, saving money to take early childhood education classes. She was kind, patient, and had a warmth that reminded me of my mother's best qualities. Lana seemed to appreciate my dedication to building a stable future and understood that my drive to succeed came from a place of love rather than ambition. We dated for years before I proposed to her. By then, I had been promoted twice and was earning enough to support both of us comfortably. Lana had been talking about wanting to be a mother and a homemaker one day, and I loved the idea of being able to offer her that option. My own mother never had the luxury of choosing between work and family. She needed her 2 jobs just to pay the rent and buy food. The first years of our marriage felt like everything I had hoped for. We bought a small house in a decent neighborhood, and I threw myself into my work with the goal of providing Lana with security and comfort. I typically worked 50 to 60 hours a week, but I made sure that when I was home, I was fully present. We had dinner together most nights and spent time together. The memory that shaped everything about how I conceive family and relationships happened when I was 8 years old. My father left my life, leaving a note on the kitchen counter, explaining that the financial pressure was too much, that he could not bear being responsible for supporting a family when every month felt like drowning. My mother found that note when she returned from dropping me off at school. By the time I got home that afternoon, she had already started making plans for our survival. She never said a bad word about my father in front of me. She never used me as a weapon in any anger or pain she felt. Instead, she simply got to work. She took on multiple jobs to keep us afloat. I spent a lot of time with babysitters and in after-school programs. But when my mother was home, she was completely present. Watching my mother work to the point of exhaustion to keep our small family together made me understand something fundamental about responsibility. She never complained, never made me feel like a burden, never suggested that life would be easier if she did not have to take care of me. She simply did what had to be done day after day, year after year. At some point during those difficult years, I made a promise to myself. If I was ever lucky enough to have my own family, I would never abandon them as my father had abandoned us. I would work as hard as necessary to provide stability and security. And I would never let the people I loved feel the kind of uncertainty and fear that had defined my childhood. This promise became the driving force behind everything I did. I worked hard in school, not because I was a natural academic, but because I understood that education was the path to better opportunities at that time. I got a job at 16, saving every dollar I could for community college. After graduating, I found a job as a junior financial advisor and slowly built a career that could sustain the kind of life I had dreamed of providing for a family. When my wife Lana became pregnant, we were both thrilled. We had been married for 3 years at that point and felt ready to start a family. Lana suggested quitting her job to focus entirely on being a mother, and I supported the decision wholeheartedly. This was exactly what I had worked for, to be able to provide well enough so my wife could choose to dedicate herself to raising our child. I increased my work hours to compensate for the loss of Lana's income, but I felt it was worth it. When Connor was born, healthy and perfect, I felt that I had successfully fulfilled the promise I had made to myself as a child. I was providing for my family in a way that my father had never been able to provide for us. The following years seemed almost too good to be true. Lana adapted wonderfully to motherhood, and Connor was a happy, healthy child who reached all his developmental milestones on time. We were able to move to a larger house in a better neighborhood when Connor turned 2. Lana seemed genuinely content with our life as a stay-at-home mother. She never complained about my work schedule, nor did she make me feel guilty for the long hours I put in to maintain our lifestyle. I felt incredibly blessed during this period. Lana seemed to understand that my dedication to work was motivated by love for our family rather than a desire to avoid domestic responsibilities. When I was home, I was fully engaged. I played with Connor, helped with bedtime routines. I took care of the household chores that Lana could not manage with a young child. By the time Connor turned 4, he was attending preschool 3 days a week, which gave Lana some time to herself while I was at work. She used this time to do the grocery shopping, go to appointments, and occasionally have lunch with friends. Our routine felt comfortable and sustainable, and I believed we had achieved the kind of family stability I had always wanted to provide. The first disturbance in our peaceful life came in the form of neighborhood crime reports. Over the course of 6 weeks, there had been 4 burglaries within a 3-block radius of our house. The pattern seemed to be daytime entries when the homeowners were at work, with the thieves targeting electronics, jewelry, and small valuables that could be quickly taken. Our neighborhood had always felt safe, which was one of the reasons we had chosen to move there when Connor was born. The idea of our home being vulnerable while I was at work worried me, particularly because Lana was often there alone. Although she was home most of the time, she would run errands, take Connor out, or visit friends, leaving the house empty for hours at a time. At the community meeting organized to discuss the burglaries, several neighbors mentioned installing security systems or cameras. The police officer who spoke to the group recommended visible deterrents like security company signs and motion-activated lights, but he also suggested that hidden cameras could be valuable for identification if a break-in did occur. I spent the next week researching security camera systems that were appropriate for our needs. I did not want something too complicated or expensive, just basic coverage that would provide peace of mind. I decided on a wireless system with 4 cameras that could be monitored remotely via a smartphone application and that stored recordings on internal memory cards. The installation was simple enough that I could handle it myself over a weekend. I placed 1 camera covering the front door access, another watching the backyard, and 2 indoor cameras with views of the living room and kitchen area. These locations would capture anyone entering the house, while still respecting our family's privacy in the bedrooms and bathrooms. Lana had taken Connor to visit her parents that weekend, so I was able to complete the installation without interruptions. I tested each camera through the application, confirmed that the image quality was clear, and verified that the motion detection settings were working correctly. The system seemed to work exactly as expected. In my haste to get the cameras installed and operational, I forgot to mention the system to Lana when she and Connor returned home. It was not a deliberate omission, I simply had other things on my mind. And since the cameras were for our family's protection, it did not occur to me that discussing them was urgent. The cameras were small and discreetly placed, so they were not immediately noticeable unless you were specifically looking for them. Over the next few months, I would occasionally check the live feeds from the cameras through the application, and there were never any security incidents that required my attention. The burglaries in our neighborhood had stopped after that meeting, likely because the increased security measures and police patrols had deterred the opportunistic criminals who had been operating in the area. Since there had been no security issues, I stopped regularly monitoring the camera system. The application sent notifications if motion was detected, but since Lana and Connor were home most days, these alerts were constant and not particularly useful. I started ignoring the notifications, trusting that the system was running in the background and storing recordings in case they were ever needed. One Friday afternoon, about 8 months after the cameras were installed, I received a different kind of notification from the camera application. The internal storage was almost full, and the system would automatically start deleting the oldest recordings in 48 hours to make space for new footage. The application suggested reviewing and saving any important recordings before the automatic deletion occurred. I planned to spend some time that weekend reviewing the stored footage, partly to free up storage space and partly out of curiosity about what 6 months of our daily life looked like from the camera's perspective. In fact, I was looking forward to seeing moments I had missed while I was at work. Connor playing, Lana going about her daily routines, maybe some interactions between them that would be worth saving as family memories. On Saturday morning, after Connor finished his breakfast and was busy with toys in his playroom, I settled in my office with my laptop to review the camera recordings. The system had stored hundreds of hours of video, organized by date and camera location. I decided to start by skipping through recent recordings at high speed, looking for anything interesting or worth preserving. The first hour of review was exactly what I expected. Lana moved through her daily routines. Connor played, and a normal domestic life unfolded while I was at work. There were clips of Lana doing housework, preparing meals, helping Connor with activities, and taking him outside to play in the backyard. It was nice to see these moments I normally missed, and I found myself smiling at Connor's enthusiasm for everything he did. But as I continued to review the recordings, something started to bother me. There was a silver Honda Accord that appeared in several clips, always parked in our driveway during the afternoon hours. At first, I assumed it was a delivery vehicle or perhaps a friend of Lana's I did not know. But the car appeared frequently, several times a week, and always during the same time period, usually between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. I started paying more attention to the clips that included this silver Honda. A man would get out of the car, always the same person. He seemed comfortable approaching our house, like someone who had been there many times before. What I found strange was how Lana greeted this man, even from the limited view provided by the front door camera. I could see that their interaction seemed familiar and warm. They would hug briefly before going inside together, and Lana's body language suggested he was someone she was happy to see rather than a contractor or service provider. I switched to reviewing the indoor camera recordings from the same dates and times. What I found made me stop the video player and lean back in my chair, trying to process what I was seeing. Lana and this man, who I would later find out was named Ryan, were clearly involved in a romantic relationship. The indoor cameras captured them in intimate situations that went far beyond friendship or casual acquaintance. They were physically affectionate, in ways that Lana and I had not been in a long time. I forced myself to keep watching. Although each clip felt like a physical blow, this was not an isolated incident or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was an ongoing affair that had been happening in my house, in my absence, for months. The recordings showed that this man's visits occurred 2 or 3 times a week, always during the time slot when I was at work and Connor was at school. The most devastating aspect of what I was seeing was not just the betrayal, but the realization of how much effort and planning had gone into deceiving me. Lana had clearly organized her schedule around these visits, timing them perfectly to avoid being caught. She had maintained a completely normal relationship with me at home while carrying on this intense affair during the day. As I continued with other recordings, I discovered that on several occasions when her lover visited and our son was at home instead of at preschool, Lana would lock Connor in his room so she could be alone with her lover. The previous camera captured this several times while Lana was distracted in the living room. There were also instances where Lana had been late to pick up Connor from preschool because her time with her affair partner had run longer than planned. I could see timestamps showing that Connor should have been picked up at noon, but Lana did not leave the house until after 1. It meant that our 4-year-old son was left waiting at school while his mother prioritized her affair. I stopped watching the recordings at that point. The evidence of Lana's infidelity was overwhelming and undeniable, but discovering that Connor had been neglected and possibly traumatized as part of her deception was more than I could handle at that moment. I closed my laptop and sat in my office for nearly 2 hours, trying to process what I had learned about my wife and the life we had been living together. The questions that tormented me during those hours were not just about Lana's betrayal, but about my own blindness to what had been happening. How had I missed the signs of such extensive deceit? Had Lana's contentment with our life been completely fabricated? What had I failed to provide that had led her to seek intimacy elsewhere? I thought about all the times Lana had seemed genuinely happy with our family life. All the conversations where she had expressed satisfaction with being a stay-at-home mother. All the moments when she had seemed loving and committed to our marriage. Had it all been an act? She had been planning or carrying out this affair even at times when she seemed most connected to me and Connor. When I finally came out of my office and rejoined my family for the rest of the weekend, I had to try very hard to maintain a normal demeanor. Lana noticed I seemed distant during dinner and asked me if everything was okay. I told her I had received some troubling news about a client's situation at work, which was a complete fabrication, but it seemed to satisfy her curiosity. Lana's complete lack of guilt or anxiety about her own deceptions was almost as disturbing as the affair itself. She showed no signs of internal conflict about the double life she had been leading. After dinner, she was affectionate with me in the same casual way she had been for months, apparently unconcerned by the fact that she had been intimate with another man just a few days earlier. Over the following days, I found myself studying Lana's behavior for signs of the deception I now knew existed. What amazed me was how seamlessly she maintained the facade of our normal family life. She prepared meals, cared for Connor, managed household chores, and interacted with me exactly as she had been doing for months. There was no indication that she was having an affair or feeling any guilt about her betrayal. During this period of observation, I had to make some fundamental decisions about how to respond to what I had discovered. My first instinct was to confront Lana immediately, demand an explanation, and try to understand how our marriage had deteriorated to this point without my knowledge. But I realized that an emotional confrontation would likely result in denials, excuses, and attempts to minimize the severity of what had been happening. Instead, I forced myself to think strategically about what would be best for Connor. The recordings I had seen showed clear evidence that he had been negatively affected by Lana's affair, locked in his room, left waiting at school, exposed to adult situations that were inappropriate for a 4-year-old child. Any decision I made about our marriage had to prioritize his well-being above my own emotional needs. I spent several sleepless nights considering whether our marriage could be saved. Lana had been carrying on an affair for a long time, lying to me daily, and using our son as a prop in her deception. The trust, which had been the foundation of our relationship, was completely destroyed, and I could not imagine how it could ever be rebuilt. More importantly, I realized that Connor was being raised by a woman who was capable of elaborate and ongoing deception, who was willing to neglect his needs for her own gratification, and who was teaching him through her behavior that dishonesty was acceptable. As someone who was raised by a single mother with unwavering integrity, I could not accept the idea of Connor learning these lessons from Lana's example. After a week of anguished consideration, I decided to end our marriage. This was not just about punishing Lana for her betrayal. It was about protecting Connor from being raised in an environment built on lies and ensuring that he had at least one parent who modeled honesty and integrity. I started looking for family law attorneys who specialized in divorce cases involving custody disputes. Based on online reviews and recommendations, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer with extensive experience in complex divorce proceedings. When I met with the lawyer, I brought copies of the camera recordings that documented Lana's affair. He reviewed the evidence carefully and explained that the recordings were legally admissible and would be extremely valuable in both the divorce process and the custody determination. The combination of documented adultery and child neglect would likely result in a favorable custody arrangement and protection from alimony obligations. He recommended moving forward quickly with the divorce proceedings before Lana became aware of the evidence against her. For the next 3 weeks, I maintained our normal family routine while the lawyer prepared the divorce petition. This was one of the most difficult periods of my life. Acting like a loving husband, knowing that our marriage was already over, interacting normally with Lana, knowing the extent of her deceit, and preparing to disrupt Connor's life in a way that would initially be traumatic but was ultimately necessary for his long-term well-being. The cameras continued to record during this period, documenting additional evidence of Lana's ongoing affair. Her lover's visits continued with the same frequency and the same casual intimacy that had characterized their relationship for months. Lana showed no signs of ending the affair or feeling guilty about her behavior. Finally, my lawyer completed the divorce petition, and we scheduled for the papers to be served on a Tuesday morning, when I would be at work and Connor would be at preschool. I wanted Lana to receive the documents in private without Connor being present for what would likely be an emotional scene. When Lana called me at work after receiving the divorce papers, her reaction was exactly what I had expected: shock, anger, and denial. But when I told her about the camera recordings, her tone changed completely. She realized that her affair had been documented in detail and that her attempts at denial would be futile. Then, she tried to blame me for not being present enough in our marriage. The divorce process took several months to complete, but the evidence I had gathered made the outcome practically predetermined. Lana's lawyer tried to negotiate a settlement that would provide her with alimony and significant time with Connor, but the recordings of her affair and neglect towards our son made such arrangements impossible to justify. Ultimately, I was granted primary custody of Connor, and Lana initially received supervised visitation rights. The court determined that her behavior had created an unstable environment for Connor and that his best interests would be served by living primarily with me. Lana was required to complete parenting classes and therapy before her visits could be unsupervised. The financial settlement was straightforward, as we had a prenuptial agreement, and Lana's adultery eliminated any claim she might have had to ongoing support. She received her share of our joint assets, but no alimony, and I kept the house and primary custody of Connor. In the months following the divorce, I reduced my work hours to focus on single parenting with the help of caregivers. Connor adapted remarkably well to our new routine, and I realized he was actually more relaxed and secure than he had been during the last months of the marriage. He no longer had to witness the tension that had existed between Lana and me, and he no longer experienced the neglect and confusion that had resulted from Lana's divided attention. Looking back now, I realized that the promise I made to myself as a child, to never abandon my family as my father had abandoned us, had prepared me to handle this situation with Connor's best interests as my priority. Although my marriage had failed, I had succeeded in providing my son with stability and an honest upbringing during a difficult transition. The hidden cameras had revealed a truth that was painful but necessary to acknowledge. Sometimes, protecting your family means making decisions that are difficult in the short term but essential for long-term well-being. Lana's affair and her neglect of Connor had made our family fundamentally unstable, no matter how normal our life seemed on the surface. Connor and I have built a new routine together that feels more authentic and peaceful than the last years of my marriage. While the divorce was painful, I know I made the right decision for both of us. My son is learning what it means to live with integrity and honesty, values that will serve him well throughout his life.